The golden light of the late afternoon spilled across the narrow streets of the city, painting the cobblestones in hues of amber and rose. Ilara walked briskly, her sketchbook clutched to her chest, feeling the familiar hum of excitement in her veins. Today was important, not just another day at her small studio, but a day that could mark the beginning of something extraordinary. At the corner cafe, she spotted Cellini already waiting, her dark hair tumbling over her shoulders in waves, her smile radiant, almost too perfect. Ilara's chest tightened with a mixture of warmth and envy she didn't dare admit aloud. Cellini had always seemed to glide effortlessly through life, while Ilara fought for every inch of recognition. "Ilara," Cellini called, her voice like a bell. She waved a hand, sending a few strands of hair into her face, which she brushed back with a delicate flick. "Hey," Ilara said, dropping her bag onto the chair opposite. "You got here early." "I had to," Cellini said with a sly grin. "I couldn't wait to hear your news, Spilett." Ilara hesitated, the words catching in her throat. This was a big opportunity, one she had dreamed about for years. And Cellini had been there through every late night, every failed attempt, every tiny victory. She had been her anchor. Could she trust her completely with this news? Yes, she whispered finally, opening her sketchbook. She flipped through the pages, revealing intricate drawings and ideas that had consumed her for months. "I got invited to exhibit at the Vale Gallery. They want to feature my work." Cellini's eyes widened, a shimmer of what could have been excitement flickering across her face, but there was something else beneath it, subtle and unsettling, like a shadow passing over sunlight. "That's incredible," Cellini said, her voice light but measured. "You've earned it, Ilara. Honestly, I'm so proud of you." She reached across the table, squeezing Ilara's hand with a tenderness that felt genuine. Yet Ilara felt a strange pang of unease. They spent the afternoon wandering the city streets, talking about colors, composition, and the fleeting inspiration that often drove Ilara to create. Cellini listened with rapt attention, occasionally offering suggestions or teasing observations that made Ilara laugh. It was easy to forget, in these moments, that life could ever be cruel. As dusk settled and the first stars blinked awake in the indigo sky, Cellini leaned back against the railing of a quiet bridge, watching the river shimmer below. "You know," Cellini said softly, "sometimes I wonder if you even realize how brilliant you are. I mean, people notice, but not like I do." Ilara blushed. "You always say the nicest things, Cellini. I don't know what I'd do without you." Cellini smiled, a touch wistful, almost sad. "And you'll never have to find out. I'll always be here." It was the kind of promise that made Ilara's heart swell, a promise of loyalty, of a friendship unbreakable. Yet, as she watched Cellini's reflection ripple in the water below, a tiny, unrecognizable shadow flickered in Cellini's eyes. Something she couldn't quite name. Ilara shook her head and smiled, dismissing the unease. It was nothing. Cellini was her friend, her truest ally in a world that often felt indifferent. Tomorrow, she thought, everything could change. Tomorrow, the gallery would see her work, and the world might finally understand the beauty she carried within. And as the stars above winked knowingly, the two friends walked home, side by side, unaware that bonds forged in trust could also shatter in silence, leaving only shards to cut the heart that once believed in them without question. The morning came like a knife through fog, sharp and unrelenting. Ilara awoke with a flutter of hope in her chest, her mind replaying the events of yesterday. The laughter, the shared dreams, the promise of a future just within reach. She stretched, kissed her sketchbook, and hurried to prepare her portfolio for the gallery. But by the time she arrived, the first cracks of betrayal had already begun to form. "Sorry, Ilara," said a voice she had once trusted without question, her gallery contact, a prominent curator named Mr. Halstead, avoided her eyes, flipping through her portfolio with a mechanical air. We were going to have to reconsider the exhibition. Ilara's heart stuttered. Reconsider, but I was invited. We discussed this yesterday. He sighed, finally meeting her gaze. There have been concerns raised about your reliability, about whether your work is original. I'm afraid we cannot proceed. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her lips trembled. Concerns? Who said this? A polite shrug. I'm afraid it came from someone who knows you well, someone close. That word twisted in her chest like a thorn. Ilara's thoughts raced to Selene. No, it couldn't be. Selene would never, would she? But doubt had already begun to erode the foundation of trust she had built. By the afternoon, whispers began to swirl. Contacts she had nurtured for years now eyed her with suspicion. Friends she had confided in hesitated, their smiles tight and uncertain. The vibrant city that once seemed to welcome her creativity now felt cold and unwelcoming, as though the walls themselves were whispering that she had failed. And then, finally, the confirmation came. A mutual friend, eyes downcast, muttered the words she had been afraid to hear. It was Selene. She said you plagiarized parts of your work. She said you couldn't be trusted with the exhibition. The world tilted, a dizzying drop that left Ilara clinging to the remnants of her composure. Why would she do this? She whispered to herself, voice breaking. Her hands shook as she held her sketchbook, the lifeblood of her passion now feeling like a fragile shield against betrayal. Memories rushed back, not the smiles and laughter from yesterday, but small moments she had brushed aside. Selene's overly eager suggestions, the faint curl of envy when someone complimented Ilara's work, the subtle comments that belittled her achievements. She had ignored them, trusted in friendship. But trust, she realized with a sharp ache, was a double-edged sword, and Selene had wielded it like a weapon. That evening, Ilara found herself alone in her studio, staring at the canvas that had remained unfinished for months. Her hands trembled, a mixture of rage and sorrow coursing through her veins. She pressed her palm against the cold surface of the wood, wishing she could erase the day, erase Selene's betrayal, erase the humiliation that had been thrust upon her. Tears blurred her vision, but beneath them, something else stirred. Not hatred, not yet, but a quiet, burning resolve. She remembered the words her mother had once said, "Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. What you do with your pain, that is your power." Ilara clenched her fists. The gallery, the whispers, the ruined opportunity. They would not be the end of her story. Selene had sought to destroy her, but she had underestimated the fire that betrayal could ignite. And in that small, dimly lit studio, surrounded by brushes and sketches, Ilara made a promise to herself, a promise that would shape every choice, every stroke of paint, every breath she took in. Days to come, she would rise, she would create, and she would ensure that when the world saw her again, it would see not just the artist it had doubted, but the strength, the brilliance, and the truth that Selene had tried to bury. The seed of sweet revenge had been planted. The first days after the betrayal were the hardest. Ilara wandered through the city like a ghost, her sketches untouched, her hands shaking whenever she held a brush. The whispers of friends and colleagues seemed to echo through every empty alley, reminding her of the one who had shattered her world. But grief has a curious way of sharpening the mind. Pain, once raw, can become fuel, and Ilara, though broken, was not yet defeated. She withdrew from the familiar streets of the city, leaving behind the places where she had been humiliated. She rented a small, sunlit studio in the outskirts, a place where no one knew her, where she could rebuild without the heavy weight of scrutiny. Days turned into nights, nights into weeks. The brushes, long neglected, became extensions of her own heartbeat. Every stroke of color was a whisper of defiance, every unfinished sketch a seed of vengeance. She painted her anger, her sorrow, her loss, and with each creation the fire inside her grew brighter, hotter. She sought guidance, too. In the quiet corners of art schools and ateliers, She met mentors who saw not just talent, but potential, a raw brilliance waiting to be honed. They challenged her, pushed her, and in their eyes she glimpsed something she had almost forgotten: belief. Not blind belief like the trust she had once placed in Cellini, but recognition earned through perseverance and skill. Ilara's style evolved. It became sharper, more evocative, more daring. Her paintings began to speak in a language that could not be ignored, drawing attention from galleries and critics who had once overlooked her. She experimented with textures, colors that clashed yet harmonized, and techniques that defied convention. Every canvas was a story, every stroke a confession of resilience. But her transformation was not merely artistic. She had learned caution, the subtle art of reading people, of understanding motives without losing herself. Her heart, though still tender, had grown stronger. She no longer flinched at praise, nor trembled at criticism. And yet, in the quietest hours, when the moon cast silver shadows across her studio, Ilara allowed herself one indulgence, the thought of Cellini. She imagined her friend's smug smile, the arrogance of assuming victory, and she allowed herself a small, secret satisfaction. The betrayal that had seemed so final now felt like the fuel for something greater. Months passed. The city changed, but Ilara's presence remained hidden, her talent quietly growing until it could no longer be contained. Her new collection, a series of paintings unlike anything she had attempted before, was alive with emotion, grief, rage, beauty, and the bittersweet taste of revenge yet to come. And then, one crisp morning, she walked back into the city, not as the woman who had been humiliated, but as a force to be reckoned with. Confident, composed, radiant with an almost untouchable brilliance, she carried her portfolio like armor, her head held high. Cellini, of course, had not changed. She was still charming, still ambitious, still unaware of the storm that had been quietly gathering beyond her sight. She believed Ilara was broken, defeated, fading into obscurity. She could not have been more wrong. Ilara had become a master of her own destiny, her pain transformed into power, her sorrow into artistry. And when she finally stepped into the light, into the gallery she had once been denied, she was ready not just to reclaim her place, but to reveal the truth. The stage was set. Every brushstroke, every careful detail, had been part of a plan far grander than simple retaliation. This was not just revenge, it was justice painted in colors too vivid to be ignored, a story told without words, where every observer would see the betrayal, the brilliance, and the unshakable triumph of the betrayed. And somewhere in the city, Cellini waited, blissfully unaware that the woman she had tried to destroy was about to return, and in her return lay the sweetest revenge imaginable. The gallery buzzed with quiet anticipation, the soft murmur of art, enthusiasts blending with the faint scent of fresh paint. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across the polished floors, but none of it could outshine the brilliance of the art that lined the walls. Ilara stood at the entrance, poised and calm, her heart steady, her eyes sharp with quiet satisfaction. She had returned not just as the wronged friend, not just as the artist who had been betrayed, but as a force of undeniable talent and grace. Each piece in her exhibition carried a story, some subtle, some unmistakably pointed, about ambition, trust, loss, and deception. The collection was her silent voice, a narrative more powerful than any confrontation or accusation. Cellini arrived fashionably late, her confident smile fixed in place, expecting to bask in what she imagined would be Ilara's humiliation. She swept through the gallery, exchanging polite words with critics and collectors, unaware that the very walls were bearing witness to her own deceit. The first piece she encountered was subtle, a painting of two intertwined figures, one cloaked in light, the other shadowed, the shadow figure reaching with hands outstretched but never touching the light. A shiver ran down Cellini's spine, though she forced herself to laugh it off. As the evening progressed, the hints became impossible to ignore. A portrait depicting a friend whispering lies behind another's back. A still life of broken mirrors, each shard reflecting a distorted, malicious grin. The crowd murmured, captivated by the emotional intensity, the haunting precision. Cellini's confident mask faltered when she reached the centerpiece, a large canvas titled Asterisk, Reflections of Betrayal Asterisk. It was unmistakably her. Every detail of her duplicity was captured. The envy that had twisted her friendship, the lies that had sabotaged Ilara's dreams. And yet it was not cruelly painted. It was beautiful, tragic, undeniable. The betrayal was on display for everyone to see, wrapped in colors and textures that made it almost poetic. Ilara approached quietly, her presence calm, serene. Cellini turned, expecting reproach, but found instead a composed figure radiating quiet triumph. You did all this?" Cellini's voice trembled, a mix of fear and disbelief. Ilara smiled, not cruelly, but with the calm confidence of someone who had survived the storm. "I didn't need to say anything. The truth speaks louder than lies ever could." The crowd, having understood the narrative in the art, began to murmur. Whispers of recognition and shock spread through the gallery, as people who had once doubted Ilara's talent now saw the depth of her genius, and the extent of Cellini's betrayal. Cellini's attempts to interrupt, to charm, or excuse fell flat. Every word she spoke seemed hollow against the undeniable evidence laid before the world. She had assumed victory, assumed that Ilara was broken, but she had underestimated the power of resilience, creativity, and quiet determination. By the end of the night, Ilara's work was praised, commissioned, and celebrated. Cellini, once poised and powerful, slipped into the shadows, her reputation tarnished not through confrontation, but through the artistry and integrity of the woman she had tried to destroy. As the last guests departed, Ilara lingered in the gallery, gazing at her work with a sense of profound satisfaction. Her pain had been transformed into beauty, her heartbreak into power. Revenge, she realized, was sweetest not when it was shouted or forced, but when it was earned, silent, and undeniable. She turned toward the door, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. Outside, the city glittered under the moonlight, vast and welcoming once more. And as she walked into the night, head held high, she carried with her not just triumph, but peace. The knowledge that betrayal had not defeated her, but had shaped her into something far stronger. Far brighter, far more unforgettable than anyone could have imagined. The story of betrayal had ended, but the story of Ilara, resilient, brilliant, unstoppable, was only beginning.